We are here together to recreate the world. So you understand the underlying issues and signals. I imagine the unimaginable. We wonder how we can solve the problems together, and recreate the world we are living in. And that's what we're going to do together. And we're going to have different perspectives, and just bringing up a few signals. 410 million people around the world will be endangered by sea level rise. 410 million people. Just get that into your mind. This is what we're facing. At the same time, we see a huge decrease of income on the low income sides, pressured by the climate change. So that's what we have to bring together to get an equality in economics and try to tackle the problem of climate change. So that's what we're going to do together. And I would like now to introduce our special guest we've got here together. Is Javed around? The ambassador, Javed?
Yeah, good morning from Paris. Yes, I'm here.
Good to see you here. The ambassador of India to the Republic of France. It's very nice to have you on the call as a real tech specialist at the same time, besides being the ambassador, which is great. Then we've got Henri, the ambassador for digital affairs around. Great to see you. Thank you very much.
Morning.
Then we've got Pramod live on stage here in the room. It's good to have you here as well. Benoit, it's good to have the European Council here with us. And it's good to see you again.
Happy to join you remotely, yes.
And then, of course, we've got Stefan from Zurich about the smart cities, and it's going to be really interesting what's going to happen. So great to have you here in a hybrid sort of session. And when we look into the question we have here, it's about how can we solve the problems we're facing. And for that one, I would hand over to Rajeesh, because he's going to ask the ambassador Henri. Rajeesh.
Perfect. Thanks, Jan. And wonderful to actually have all of you join us in this interesting panel dialogue. So my first question would be to you, Ambassador Henri. So we've had a very exciting day with a lot of speakers talking about it probably as a critical theme to address the needs of smart cities and ensuring overall digitalization actually happens in societies. So we know that you've been championing several efforts in France, most notably around the open street maps for unlocking geographic data. So just wanted to get a sense of how you see this unbundling effort translating into the startup ecosystem within France, and how are the tech entrepreneurs responding to all of these open source unbundling efforts over there?
So, thank you very much. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So, very briefly, because you did promise me a fire chat and I didn't prepare a lot. So, of course, France has a vibrant startup ecosystem, and smart cities is a very important topic. We don't have the same issue than you because we are not a growing country, but we have the old city centers that we want to protect, and we have a lot of tourists. In Paris, you have quite as many visitors as citizens. So we have to organize this a bit. We have pollution issues, traffic issues, and more broadly, how to balance the public space and how to organize it a bit. So this is a vibrant issue. And you know, before being an ambassador, I was the state CTO, and before this, I was an entrepreneur. So I work for a long time around those topics. And the more I work on those topics, the more I think that smart city, if the smart city is not a democratic city, a collective intelligent city, it's not smart. It's it could be a dystopia. If someone thinks for you on your purpose about what you should do, where you should go, when you should go, without the big feedback of the citizens themselves, it won't be a very nice smart city. It will be, as I said, a dystopia or a global movement of privatization. And for example, so far in Paris, one of our main concerns is that one big actor, I won't mention, organize 60% of the traffic of goods, you know, delivery at home. And so 60% for just one foreign actor. So just now, it starts to create some real concerns. For example, it's more and more difficult to design public policies if you don't decide where the traffic goes, for example. So, and yes, as you did mention, we consider that all the open source movements, so first, a lot of open data to allow everyone to innovate in front of the knowledge of the citizen. Then open infrastructure. So we don't have such brilliant open infrastructure as India. But as you did mention, we have a vibrant community named the French community of OpenStreetMap. Maybe you don't know OpenStreetMap. There is a small community in India, but it's a starting movement, the beginning of something. In France, we have 10,000 contributors. So OpenStreetMap is a bit like Wikipedia, but for maps, for cartography. And in France, we have 10,000 people with their smartphones. They go everywhere, every time. They cartography, they map everything, but you cannot imagine everything. Light, stops, roads, of course, traffic jam, whatever you can imagine. And this is a completely open source, free infrastructure made by the citizen. When I was a state CTO, I did ask to the French government to use it and to contribute, but most private services in France, whatever you can imagine, Uber, Deliveroo, they build the solution on those maps, but also emergency services, public services. And this is one interesting example that we can share with you, and we would love to build some bridges. I don't know if I have 3 minutes more, or because, you know, very often I think that we don't have any lesson to give to India. You have a leading position on this movement of digital public infrastructure, but maybe we can share our experience or history. And the more I exchange with you, with Pramod, with Jawed, with other friends, the more I remember that the French Revolution 2 centuries ago, the first decision were to forbid taxes between cities, because, you know, at this time we had different monies, currencies, we had different cities, and a lot of taxes when you did the travel exchange between cities. So the first was to forbid what we did call l'octroi. So we said, no, now we are one nation, we have one system, and you don't pay if you send something to another city. The metric system, because we wanted to have the same metric system everywhere in France, and of course a postal service. And the promise was, wherever you live, if you send one letter, it will take less than 3 days. And this way to build the country, the sovereignty of the country, the strength of the country, through a proper organization, through rationality, through the sharing the same metrics, is something that I do recognize. So now we are living in the modernity. We have smartphones, we have infrastructures, we have a very complex economy, but I feel something which is quite the same movement. This idea that a good rationality, a proper organization, the design of the interoperability matters a lot. Thank you, and I'm thrilled to exchange with all those distinguished speakers.
Many thanks, Ambassador Henri. I'll probably have the next question for Ambassador Javed. I'll request my colleague Jan to pose the question.
So, Ambassador Javed. Come on, Ambassador Javed. Once again, welcome on this stage here, virtually, being together. And you just heard Henri talking from France, and I know you're very, very into this space. You know a lot about these technologies, and you're bridging the worlds, basically bringing the Indian spices into the soup to Europe as well. And what is your take on Henri's former comments he had? And what do you think India can take out of that and move that across to India and even accelerate what Henri was talking about? So what's your take on that one? How can you build on what Henri was bringing into the table? And what's the spices that India can bring into the soup to make the next movement? Ambassador, it's on you.
Well, thank you, and good morning here from Paris. Very good to see some of my friends there. Pramod and Henri were there with us just last week when we spoke, when they made an excellent presentation to 45 very senior civil servants of France as part of their training program on India's digital public infrastructure. See, we are now speaking about, and I'm not a tech expert, but try to be a bridge. So one, of course, is that this is an entirely new area of collaboration and cooperation between countries, and we've had big firms working across borders, Indian firms providing solutions, then moving up the value chain in the commercial space, in the research and development space, etc. We are now talking about digital public infrastructure, digital public goods, which is an entirely new domain. In many ways, there are 3 or 4 challenges that we have to work with. One is that, you, as in any other situation, when you resist big power, then there are going to be complexities and challenges in it. And this, there is always going to be a resistance to, and there must be an alternative to concentration of power, whether it is in the hands of state or whether it is in the hands of big tech. But there will also be counter reactions. The second, of course, is that, as I said, this is an entirely new pillar of international engagement. And I'm amazed to see how much conversation there is around it, including in the G20 framework for the first time. The important thing is generating awareness across the borders. There is actually very little awareness generally about what each country is doing. While India is seen as a leader and a successful example of using technology for attaining social and public policy goals, it isn't the only country that is doing this. And while we have achieved scale and speed, there are others in different parts of the world that are also using innovation and technology to achieve and pursue public policy goals of social and economic inclusion and empowerment. Now, or in delivery of public services. So how do you create this awareness across the border about the success stories, about how it has worked? In doing that, you have to use a number of tools, and we have been trying to do that in different ways by participating in digital technology events, by hosting events. India and France have, for example, 2 such events. We have Infinity India-France Innovation and Information Technology. And more recently, we created Infrastructures, India-France Structures, which deals with essentially the digital public infrastructure. And we have seen people getting to know. In India, there was complete lack of awareness about what France is doing. We are so engaged with the Anglosphere, and particularly with the US community, that we're not aware of it. Likewise, in France, there was little awareness of what we are doing. So part of the strategy is to generate this sort of awareness and connection between the ecosystem, between not just the regulators or public policy officials, but also between the tech ecosystem. Linked to that, of course, is this particular field is very, very closely linked to the regulatory interface. Now, in digital public infrastructure, you have, of course, legal frameworks. You have institutional frameworks, regulatory dimension, and you have an administrative dimension. It varies from country to country, it varies from sector to sector. So the next stage is to really have this conversation at the regulatory level. So for people to understand what we are doing, what is possible. For example, when we talk about India's digital public infrastructure, the first question people will ask is, do you have the same data protection and privacy standards, data security standards as we do? Now, Henri has been speaking about how, despite not having a comprehensive legislation, we have a techno-legal solution to data protection, similar to what we can achieve through GDPR. Pramod gave an absolutely outstanding and very clear expose on that and an enunciation of that last week to senior civil servants. But here is a very critical thing of also identifying, corollary to this is, what are the areas that are easier to work with so that you create the confidence between countries, between communities at the level of districts, at the level of municipal corporations, state, and at the center. And I have to say that this has been a very important area of discussion between India and France. My previous experience also was with Singapore, where we initiated the idea of connecting UPI with Pay Now. It has come to fruition. We also made RuPay and Beam QR acceptable there in France through the arrangements. There we chose fintech because of the natural inclination in Singapore and support that exists. Here we have identifying a series of subjects that we are working on. And finally, in each country, in each jurisdiction, you need champions. Champions who are able to drive this process. I'd say here in France, without any hesitation, if we speak of digital public infrastructure, then Henri Verdier has been the champion. In Singapore, I had somebody in Monetary Authority of Singapore who was willing to speak on behalf of what India has achieved and to build that connection at the level of regulator and at the level of the tech ecosystem. Now, Henri is an experienced regulator, experienced tech entrepreneur, working in the government as the digital ambassador. And he has been advocating this. And I don't think without these kinds of partnerships, without identifying the right people on both sides, that it is at this stage of the evolution of international cooperation in public goods, in digital public goods, it is going to be possible for us to move forward very, very quickly. I mean, BIS report, for example, on India's DPI was an excellent example of socializing the success of BIS. So these are some of the observations that I had. There's a lot that we can learn from France. I mean, look, this is a country that has an extraordinary history of contribution to science technology, including in electronics and digital technology. They're already doing great work here, including in digital public infrastructure. And we have a great deal of philosophical convergence because we are both believe fundamentally that you cannot have a democratic, inclusive, and equal and just world today in 21st century if you don't have a democratic, inclusive, equitable, accessible digital infrastructure also. And I think this is the philosophical convergence between France or Europe and India that brings us together with great potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes. Stepping 2 steps behind into history to understand where we go into the future. And that's very important to see where did this come from? Equality, liberty, and fraternity. It was from France, and that connected with the biggest democracy in the world in India. Well, that leads us into the future. So I hand over to Rajeesh again and checking out if Switzerland is still around.
Yeah, just checking if.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, Stefan. So when Ambassador Henri actually spoke about a number of things that have been undertaken in cross smart city missions within France. Most notably Paris, Ambassador and Henri, we've been hearing about the 15-minute city ambition of Paris. Sounds like a very exciting idea, where there is like open ecosystems and interoperability unlocked at a massive level for services to be made available to all city residents. Just picking up on that cue and looking at others, critical missions such as in the smart city mission of Zurich, given that there are a lot of transformative shifts happening around better allocation of energy resources, the heat grid, the shift to circular economy and so forth. So in your planning and execution, how much does interoperability and a focus on open protocols factor in? Is that a critical instrument of policy for when you look to implementing these smart city missions at Zurich at a citywide scale?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I will switch off my video in order to have a stable connection. Maybe I just will talk a little bit about Smart City Zurich before I answer your questions around digital protocols. The city of Zurich is moving forward. Maybe you just heard it in the news. We now don't have two major banks in Switzerland. We just have one left. We will see what this is going to mean to the country. But besides that, Smart City Zurich. I think Smart City Zurich is going for a pretty different approach than other smart cities. Let me explain that. Of course, we have all these, let's call it traditional smart city activities around digitalization, about automation, but these activities are located at the specialized departments. These ambitions are localized at energy department, at mobility department, at health department, and so on. So what is Smart City Zurich? We are a team of 12 people now. What are they doing? Our job is not to support digitalization or automation itself. We are trying to support innovation within the city administration. Why that? At the city administration in Zurich, there are working more than 25,000 people, a lot of people. And we believe that these people working at the city administration know best what the problems are. So we think we have to engage them, we have to support them in order to come up with their own ideas. So this means a smart city, Zurich means for us a smart administration. And a smart administration means that people who work there can be innovative. Not everybody has to be innovative, not you have to get me right, but we have to set up the stage for people who want to be innovative. And we have 4 instruments in Smart City Zurich to support these kind of employees who want to be innovative. We have a credit system. We give money to people in order to speed up the bureaucratic processes. We have the offering of design sprints. We help the employees to work on a customer-centered approach. We have a fellowship program, and we have a instrument. It's called Stadtbox. It's a city box where employees get in touch with a lot of methodologies in order to come up with fast prototypes, with fast testing, and so on. So let me sum up this. Smart City Zurich is an approach that wants to encourage and support employees within the city administration, because we believe people who are in contact to problems every day, or challenges or solutions, they are the best to solve them. So Smart City Zurich is an ecosystem that helps people being innovative. So I hope I could make this point clear. And now to your question about the protocols and the interoperability. What we see in the city of Zurich is that of course, it's a technical issue and a technical challenge to get all this data together, but in the end, it's a cultural question. We live and we work in silos. All the different departments have developed themselves for decades, and now they have to work together. And before we set up standard protocols, we have to implement a common language. and a language not for computers, but a language for humans. And this is what we observe. First place, we have to bring all these different cultures and departments together at one table, that they are sure that everybody understands each other. And after that, I think it's an easy way to develop and establish a common protocol for all the data issues. But the most important point is that all the different departments and cultures start talking together in an efficient way. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks, Stefan. That quite clearly lays out the ambition of how smart city missions across Europe could actually take this agenda forward. It's imperative that interoperability also plays functions as a critical pillar in this growth agenda. That brings me on to another question, and this question I'll probably pose it to Benoit. Ambassador Javed also spoke about the necessity to focus on the right policy and regulatory framework as well. Given that the European Commission has been quite ahead relatively on this front, and with always a citizen-first approach in framing regulation and policy, such as the Horizons Europe program or even the EU New Energy Green Deal. Just wanted to get a sense from you, Benoit, as to how do you actually balance the two out, getting the policy and regulatory framework in place while also accommodating for innovation and ensuring that tech energy within the startup ecosystem stays up to front. So getting the two balancing out together is a task in itself. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you, and quite interesting. It's actually a question that I hear quite often, and I would say even more, sometimes more directly, a criticism over the European Union, very good at regulating, but through that hampering the development and innovation. So I would like maybe to debunk this narrative and to explain that we believe that on the contrary, I mean, we're bringing an environment which is prone to innovation. If I'm not with you this afternoon, it's because I have to speak a bit later here in Delhi at a global conference on digital health organized by WHO. And again, here I will speak about the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation of the EU, that has made the EU regulation system very famous, creating a benchmark on regulation for privacy and data protection. But what I can tell you is that in the morning here, everybody was talking about this issue as well. So definitely by bringing this benchmark, it helps developing an understanding of a need for convergence of an approach to bring this kind of protection. The EU is developing further regulation also for the digital. We're talking, and we are going to have actually in place now and enforced very soon a couple of regulations, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. But we have more in the making, the Artificial Intelligence Act and even the Data Act. And we don't develop regulation for the sake of the pure pleasure of regulation. And that's what we need to understand. And I think it was brilliant said by both Ambassador Verdier and Ambassador Ashraf, is that this is just an expression of fundamental values and rights that we want to defend through these regulations. There is an element that you may have missed, but I would like to bring it to your attention, is that the EU has adopted in December last year a declaration on digital rights and principles. And there, this starts by saying that we want to put people at the center. We want to give them freedom of choice. We want to empower them, and we want to participate in the development. We want to bring them security, safety, and sustainability. So this is through these values and these rights that are guiding the decisions to go and regulate. And if we want to do that, it's because we do believe that it's a choice of society. We don't want to have the digital transformation used for surveillance of the society. But we don't want either that digital transformation is only benefiting a handful of private operators and actually hampering innovation. And that's where we very much focus our approach on regulation at the EU, to be sure that on one side it's human-centric, giving empowerment of the citizens, but also giving them trust. And I will just take a couple of examples, if you allow me. The first one is on the GDPR. The GDPR is here absolutely necessary to bring trust that for citizens that their data is protected, that it's not going to be overused, be it by private sector or by the government. And it's, for instance, something which is absolutely essential in digital health that we're discussing today in Delhi. The second one is on artificial intelligence. The approach and the proposed Artificial Intelligence Act is to try to get a segmentation and differential approach. And for instance, to decide that certain use of artificial intelligence will certainly be just prohibited because they are too dangerous for the society that we want to live in. For example, use of AI for social scoring. So that's one element. But the other element that we very much take into account, and which is your concern, is to have a regulation which is also conducive for innovation and competition. And here I would like to take an example of the Digital Markets Act, for instance, that where we want again, and also the Digital Services Act, where we actually bring this differential approach, depending on the size of the online platforms or the gatekeepers. We will have a differential set of regulatory requirements. And these are differential both for not overburdening the startups, SMEs, and the developing industry, or the developing enterprises, but also to be sure, for instance, that there is a fair competition environment. For instance, for gatekeepers, the fact that they will have to share the data with the enterprises or the commerce enterprises that are hosted by these platforms will bring back some elements of fairness into the sharing of data. The reflection on sharing of data is very much at the core of the Data Act, which is under development at the EU, where we do believe that, again, for promoting innovation, we need to have a reflection on the ownership of data, but also on the sharing of data. We're bringing the element of data altruism, reflection on sharing of governmental data, but also the framework for sharing private data. We need to develop this mechanism. And we'd like just to finish by saying that I've insisted on regulation because you started by that, but of course the approach is not only about regulation. We're also very much interested in developing data infrastructure that such as data empowerment in digital, for instance. So these digital public infrastructure are very much at the reflection. But we go beyond also, and you were mentioning Digital Europe. Research and innovation is also absolutely essential in developing the conducive environment for digital transformation. And third one is investment. Investment through, and it was mentioned as well, public-private partnership, which are very important. So as a conclusion, I would just like to say that regulation is just one of the enablers, I believe, and it was said by both ambassadors as well. It's just as one of the enablers. What you were mentioning regarding open source solution is just another one. The access to data, the conditions, the fair access to data is another one. And the digital public goods is also another one. So all that is just bringing an ecosystem and environment for global policy conducive for the type of society that we want, that will be helped with the digital transformation. And that will bring also all these elements that we discuss at international level, for instance, for defining how we can have this one world development, and that includes, for instance, elements such as data flows between government and between states, and we need all these elements to bring trust that will allow this data flow and data free flow with trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Benoit. So,
thank you, Benoit. And I know, Ambassador, that your time is running, and we need your expertise on what is the things what India can put into the place and enhance this collaboration, enhance this push forward to get these cities of Switzerland, the European Union, France, and India moving. So, Ambassador, your last 3 thoughts maybe about that.
Yeah, and very briefly, I think different countries and different regions will require different approaches. I think from a perspective of an Indian diplomat, I'd say that there is a global opportunity really for India to quote unquote export or share, to be more sort of benign in this, its expertise, its products, its experience, its solutions, its architecture, its regulatory successes, etc. I'd say that, there are billions, more than 1 billion unbanked people, more than 1 billion uninsured people. There are cash payments all over the world. There are fragmented financial markets, much the same way we were before 2014. So I'd say that's one area, not just interoperability such as between UPI, but to be able to bring to many parts of the world, Africa, in Asia and Latin America, the financial inclusion, digitalization of the financial market, etc., that we have been very successful with. Or the second pillar is the governance, the use of digital technology and open source, products for delivering better governance and for public services and welfare. Again, this will help achieve SDGs in a big way. In fact, in 2016, I was working with then advisor to the UN Secretary General, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who was also the Broadband Commission chair, on doing a UN-India sort of a partnership for SDG using digital technology in Africa. Unfortunately, for a number of reasons, it didn't make progress. Most of those reasons were on our side. Maybe it was too premature. In Europe, I would say, for example, in France, there are a number of products. I would, of course, say that UPI would be a great thing for Europe to adopt, because I see the European Payments Initiative is in shambles. The payments infrastructure is nothing compared to what we have. So there is something to be learned over there. But there are products like, we've just had a very exciting product, which is the Namma Yatri. Now, Henri Verdier mentioned it, which I hope in the next few months, my objective would be that by June or July, we should be able to launch this in Paris. But if we have to work with that kind of a mission, because I see that it is possible to do this without getting into regulatory and institutional complications with Bank of France governor or with the various institutions regulating payments. But here is something which will have an instant impact on the lives of the people of Paris. But more important, it is something that can also be a political success for the city government and for the government of France in general, because it will solve a real issue and it will enable more democratization of the mobility space in a number of ways. And I think this is the kind of a project if we identify. We could do something in the health sector. We could do something in EdTech sector. These are all areas which I clearly identify as opportunities in France and in Europe, which will provide the building block for us to do more ambitious things. And as I said, in the rest of the world, there are very, very clear opportunities for us. to be able to share our experience and expertise in a vast number of areas for delivering benefits to the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much for that.
So I'll apologies because I have a meeting. Thank you for having me on this panel. Happy to share my thoughts, and was very interested and was to hear many of the comments in between. And also in the previous session, there were some very exciting ideas that I've also got from this panel discussion, which we'll pursue. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ambassador. I know your time is tight. I would just jump over now to our living ChatGPT. We've got in this room here a living ChatGPT. Yes, sitting here. Pramod. Pramod, you were listening now to this very interesting insights from Switzerland, from the EU Commission, from the Ambassador, and all the things happening here. So if I would ask now ChatGPT 4, Pramod, to make a conclusion in 1 minute, what were the most interesting insights you got?
Thank you for having, and thank you, Henri and Javed and all of you on thank you for taking time. There are a few takeaways. It's very, very clear in my mind. One, as the systems get digitized in a sustainable environment, whether it's rooms, conference rooms, electric EV charging points, public utilities, they will need to be discovered. And discovery, imagining discovery merely as a point in the map is actually futile. I'll argue that only static resources can be put on the map. But more and more resources are dynamic. Availability of those resources are dynamic. The characteristics are dynamic. Some of them are even mobile. So that is not naturally amenable to put it on a map. So a lot of people have asked me, why can't we simply use maps and put all the available resources? You can discover them, right? Dynamic resources cannot be discovered on a map. Charging points, and then discovery is the beginning of engagement. If I can find a nearby conference room right now available, which might be lying idle. Hundreds of conference rooms today lie idle in cities. Imagine if you can discover them, book them, fulfill them, use them. It not only allows the consumers to discover these dynamically available resources on a network, for the providers, so much idling time. Lack of discovery creates assets that are unused and idle. And so you can convert very much an incentive structure. So I see the idea of discovery and fulfillment of anything that can be represented as a resource. It's a very, very powerful idea for a vibrant, sustainable, whether it's smart city or multi-city networks to happen. So we should not limit, my takeaways and we should not limit this imagination only to taxi booking or things, including conference rooms, including any resources, charging resources, anything that is resource that is already there. Someone has invested in a resource. Why can't that be discovered? Why can't that be booked? Why can't that be leveraged and used? It's and that's exactly what Beacon Protocol community is imagining to do beyond the static mapping which we saw. So the answer is that what Google search did is what Google Maps did. Static indexing of knowledge. What ChatGPT is doing is bringing alive a conscience, bringing alive a reasoning engine that allows you to be much more interactive with that knowledge, not a static discovery of knowledge. Beacon is doing exactly that in the commerce, where the static resources that are idle there may be mapped on a Google map or an OpenStreetMap is now coming alive to be discovered, booked, and leveraged. And that's a very, very powerful thinking. That will drive open data, open network, and Europe has been leading interoperability. I have to thank you for your USB-C push on iPhone and every other phone. So, a lot of our chargers are all driven by Europe. Europe always been pushing for interoperability. So I don't see any reason why we can't up-level the interoperability argument beyond physical few things to anything resource, any resource that can be discovered. I should be able to discover in an interoperable and book in an interoperable way. That will drive dramatic usage of idle resources in the system. I think it will boost the economy. I'm excited about seeing some pilots. Thank you for all your leadership from Europe.
Thank you, Pramod. You're adding now the dynamics into it and the mobility, and I just throw the word once more to Rajeesh, and then we go to this other sort of mobility to the lunch break. But before that.
Yeah, just a quick one. I just wanted to extend on what this Pramod said. So a follow-up question to that also could have been like, along with smart discovery of resources that societies at a city level or a country level may actually need, could we also think of smart application of policies dynamically
Excellent
at runtime? If that's also something that be done using open protocols.
Yeah, I think that's very, very powerful, especially for the smart city leadership, policymakers. Policymakers today write policies in PDF documents. I mean, one sense, publish in documents, which are supposedly read by humans to subsequently implement them. But I think a techno-legal approach allows policies as code, policies to be implemented onto a technological infrastructure and enforced policy. So like smart contracts or smart policies, we should not shy away from reimagining policy as code, executables that are deployable onto a network. So if you have what can be done, what cannot be done, what are the rules of the game, can all be actually represented in machine readable smart contracts and actually implemented on open networks. Very, very powerful imagination. India is already doing some of that. And I don't see any reason why, as we explore open networks, interoperable open networks in Europe, we should also look at how policies can be converted into executables and actually deployed so that it is no more static policy. They're actually much more responsive to the needs of the industry. Policy can be much more dynamic and much more contextual to local needs.
Thank you, Pramod. So last question to the guys here on the panel, and this is a challenging one. I want you now to conclude the whole story for yourself in 3 words. Just 3 words. Benoit, if you have listened to all this, what's your takeaway in 3 words? I will count.
Oh, I'm not very good at synthesis, but I would definitely say that, we are all together in one. So be it convergence of standards, convergence of regulatory framework and policy, will bring the real society that we want.
At 3. You're already at 3. Thank you, Benoit. So I hand over to Switzerland. 3 words. I know Swiss can be very precise.
Thank you. I think we understood that we need individual solutions everywhere in the world, but we are all agreeing that we are sharing the same challenges, and this is a good starting point. We have to go on working together and find individual solutions, and we will make it.
Interesting how the interpretation of 3 words is, but thank you to Switzerland. Going over to Henri. Henri, 3 words.
Okay. Before my 3 words, I did ask the floor for 2 fingers comments, just to say to Pramod that this example of finding the meeting room is not hypothetical. This is exactly the story of Airbnb. Airbnb did create a big business knowing where are empty apartments. And the very interesting fact is that now Airbnb is building houses because they know exactly where they have a lack of offer in front of the demand. So that's very important to observe this. My 3 words are open standards, because the story of internet is completely a story of open standards, is permissionless innovation, and is good public policies. Thank you very much for this meeting.
Thank you, Henri. And now over to Pramod. 3 words.
Regulation, innovation, market innovation, and equity.
And lunch break. Oh, just, I was called back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah.
on the panel.
Thank you. Let's give a big round of applause.
Thank you.